Last week, we considered Jesus' response to rejection. Though he knew everything that was about to transpire ever before it happened, he still kneeled before the betrayer and showed his incredible love by washing Judas's feet. He continued to show his love as he washed the feet of Peter, who would deny even knowing him. In fact, he loved all of them to the end, washing each one's feet in turn, knowing that all would abandon him before the night was out. He set an example for the 12 and for all those who would call him Lord in the years since, an example that would not be easy to follow. Today, we examine Jesus' response to people who found themselves on the receiving end of rejection. He didn't concern himself with what other people thought, with societal stereotypes, or even about keeping a good reputation. He loved on people, all people. No one was excluded. So this morning, let's dive right in to discover just how very countercultural Jesus' treatment of others really was. We're going to turn to Mark 10:13-16 to begin with. One day, some parents brought their children to Jesus so he could touch and bless them. But the disciples scolded the parents for bothering him. When Jesus saw what was happening, he was angry with his disciples. He said to them, "Let the children come to me. Don't stop them. For the kingdom of God belongs to those who are like these children. I tell you the truth. Anyone who doesn't receive the kingdom of God like a child will never enter it." Then he took the children in his arms and he placed his hands on their heads and he blessed them. What's happening in this story? Well, parents are bringing their children to Jesus for a blessing. So why did the disciples scold the parents? Well, they thought Jesus was too busy to be bothered. He had more important things to do than spend time with kids. But how does Jesus react? Well, he's angry with the disciples. How dare they prevent anyone from coming to him? Now, it's easy for us to shake our heads at the disciples' reaction, but we shouldn't be too quick to judge them. We should try putting ourselves in a similar situation. An important guest has been invited to speak, and when you attempt to talk to this person, a bunch of kids are milling around making lots of noise. How do you respond? What thoughts are going through your head? Just as in Jesus' day, children are sometimes viewed as an inconvenience and even a nuisance in some circumstances. Most of us claim we love children, but not their noise or their mess. And let's be honest, sometimes their presence in the same room causes us to wish they weren't, like the little one having a temper tantrum in the mall in the aisle right next to you. The same was the case in Jesus' day. Children were considered of little to no consequence by the majority of adults. It was important to have a boy to pass on the family name and property, and it was important to have children to ease the workload of daily living. However, beyond that, they weren't held in any particular esteem by the elders of their lives. In the minds of many adults, they were to be seen, not heard, tolerated until they were old enough to be of use. But they were certainly never more than an unwelcome distraction when the big people were talking. But how does Jesus respond to the presence of children? He invites them over. He embraces them, he blesses them, and he points to them as an example of what is required to enter the kingdom of heaven. In essence, he was telling his audience, including the disciples, think you're better than a child? Think again. No one was unimportant to Jesus, especially not children. So that's a story of how Jesus treated those considered unimportant. But what about those who are considered unteachable? For that, we're going to turn to Luke 10:38-42. As Jesus and his disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he taught. But Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. She came to Jesus and said, "Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me." But the Lord said to her, "My dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. There's only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary's discovered it, and it won't be taken away from her. Now, there are many stories of Jesus treating women with greater regard than his society did of the day. But few show the depth to which Jesus advocated for women's rights and abilities like the one we just read. Let's take a closer look. An important guest, Jesus, is visiting the home of two sisters, Mary and Martha, and their brother Lazarus. When he came to playing host, how would the expectations on the men and women have differed? Well, the women were expected to prepare the meal and wait on the men, and the men would talk, often in a separate room. So, which of the siblings is not living up to the expectations? Well, that's Mary, of course. She has chosen to join the men and listen to Jesus as he teaches. Martha is attempting to be the responsible female, living up to the expectations, and calls on Jesus to back her up by telling Mary to join her in the kitchen. But what does Jesus say? He says, Mary has chosen the better thing, and it will not be taken from her. Can't you just see Martha's shock, matched only by some of the disciples who may have been questioning Mary's presence as well? Jesus dismissed the gendered expectations and refused to deny this opportunity to Mary, who many would have judged as shirking her womanly responsibility. Was Jesus being unsympathetic to Martha's workload? I don't think so. I think that Jesus was actually inviting Martha to set aside the things she thought were required of her and come join the group too. She was missing out. What would have happened if she had stopped? The meal might have been served a little later, but no one would have gone hungry. Mary and probably Jesus himself would have pitched in to help in the preparation of the meal after the discussion. Martha was being invited to sit at the teacher's feet as his student, alongside the men. Now, that may not seem like such a big deal for us today, but it wasn't so very long ago that women were not even permitted to attend university. We still have countries around this world where girls are not allowed to attend school past grade 8, if at all. And in Jesus' day, girls were not educated in the same way the boys were. Boys were permitted to engage in higher learning like reading, writing, mathematics, religious studies, and philosophy, while the instruction of girls focused on domestic skills like cooking, sewing, basket weaving, child rearing, and the like. The view of women in Jesus' day was dismally low, my apologies. Many viewed a girl's education in areas outside of keeping a home and raising children to be a waste of time and resources, if she was capable of learning at all. A woman who burnt a morning toast could find herself served with divorce papers before the end of the day for burning the toast. The prayer of blessing, still used today by Orthodox Jewish men, that they pray every morning, says, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has not made me a woman." Jesus dismissed this patriarchal view that put women in an inferior position to men. He not only tolerated Mary in the room, he commended her for her choice and refused to allow anyone to take this right from her. Mary has chosen the better thing, and it will not be taken from her. After that, who would dare protest her choice? She had received Jesus' approval and backup. For Jesus, no one was unteachable, not even women. So we've seen the unimportant, the unteachable. What about Jesus' response to the untouchable? Let's go to Luke 5, verses 12 to 14. In one of the villages, Jesus met a man with an advanced case of leprosy. When the man saw Jesus, he bowed with his face to the ground, begging to be healed. "Lord," he said, "if you are willing, you can heal me and make me clean." Jesus reached out and touched him. "I am willing," he said, "be healed." And instantly, the leprosy disappeared. Then Jesus instructed him not to tell anyone what had happened. He said, "Go to the priest and let him examine you. Take along the offering required in the law of Moses for those who have been healed of leprosy. This will be a public testimony that you've been cleansed." Leprosy, now known as Hansen's disease, is the result of a slow growing bacteria that affects the nerves, eyes, and skin. It's still around today. It's no longer thought to be as contagious as it once was, and effective treatments do exist. But if left untreated, the nerve damage can result in the crippling of hands and feet, paralysis, and blindness. Luke tells us that Jesus is met by a man with an advanced case of leprosy. He couldn't hide his condition, even if he wanted to. In the first century, there was much fear surrounding the condition. Some were forced from their homes, shunned by family members, and anyone with leprosy was considered unclean, so could not enter the temple to worship God. After the man begs Jesus to heal him, how does Jesus respond? He affirms his willingness, he heals him, he instructs him to go to the priest to receive a clean bill of health, but first he touches him. He has literally given this man back his life, and it has always struck me as significant, this act of Jesus touching the man. See, the law of Moses stipulated that anyone who touched someone who was unclean would remain unclean themselves until evening or longer, depending on the source of the uncleanness. Jesus, therefore, willingly became unclean by touching this man and would have himself been unable to enter the temple court, which is set aside for worship of God. No one was untouchable God to Jesus, not even the contagious. So Jesus accepted the unimportant, he valued the unteachable, he cared for and showed compassion to the untouchable. What about the unworthy? For that, we're going to turn to Luke 19, 1 to 10. Jesus entered Jericho and made his way through the town. There was a man there named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector in the region, and he had become very rich. He tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short to see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. When Jesus came by, he looked up at Zacchaeus and called him by name. Zacchaeus, he said, quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today. Zacchaeus quickly climbed down and took Jesus to his house in great excitement and joy. But the people were displeased. He's gone to be the guest of a notorious sinner, they grumbled. Meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, I will give half my wealth to the poor, Lord, and if I have cheated people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much. Jesus responded, salvation has come to this house today, for this man has shown himself to be a true son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save those who are lost. How much do you think the crowd hated Zacchaeus? Before his encounter with Jesus, Zacchaeus had been a greedy, selfish trader of his people. He had become exceedingly wealthy by overcharging on taxes and defrauding those who didn't have the power to resist without fear of the Romans for non-compliance. The reaction of the people who treated Zacchaeus the way his notoriety deserved did nothing to change his despicable behavior. No one wanted anything to do with this little man protected by Rome who had become rich off his dishonest practices as a tax collector. But just one afternoon with Jesus, and he's a radically changed man. What happened? He had climbed a tree just to see Jesus. And when Jesus reaches the spot, he invites himself to Zacchaeus' home for a meal. Well, Zacchaeus is overjoyed, and the crowd is visibly upset. Can you think of anyone, politician maybe, who you regard with the same disdain as the crowd felt for Zacchaeus? What if you had been in the crowd, eager to talk with Jesus, and it was with that individual that Jesus chose to spend some time? How would you react? You might be scratching your head. Why would he do that? Or think, well, at least I hope Jesus lets him have it. Well, you might wish that Jesus had a not so nice surprise in store for the sinner, but not so. In fact, Zacchaeus is so grateful for this honor that Jesus bestows on him that he becomes an entirely changed man. He promises to give half of his wealth away to the poor and to pay back 4 times as much to anyone he has cheated, which he would have known because part of his job was to keep detailed records. This man, who many had condemned and had not changed his life one little bit, became a new man after a brief encounter with the kindness of Jesus. No one was unworthy to Jesus, not even sinners. But what about us? Are there some people that we consider unimportant, unteachable, untouchable, or unworthy? Jesus didn't. We're his followers. Well, let's find out what the Apostle Paul says in Romans. Beginning at verse 28. Romans 1, verse 28. Since they thought it foolish to acknowledge God, he abandoned them to their foolish thinking and let them do the things that should never be done. Their lives became full of every kind of wickedness, sin, greed, hate, envy, murder, quarreling, deception, malicious behavior, and gossip. They are backstabbers, haters of God, insolent, proud, and boastful. They invent new ways of sinning, and they disobey their parents. They refuse to understand, break their promises, are heartless, and have no mercy. They know God's justice requires that those who do these things deserve to die, yet they do them anyway. Worse yet, they encourage others to do them too. Continuing in chapter 2. You may think you can condemn such people, but you're just as bad, and you have no excuse. When you say they are wicked and should be punished, you're condemning yourself. For you who judge others do the very same things. And we know that God, in his justice, will punish anyone who does such things. Since you judge others for doing these things, why do you think you can avoid God's judgment when you do the same things? Don't you see how wonderfully kind and tolerant and patient God is with you? Does this mean nothing to you? Can't you see that his kindness is intended to turn you from your sin? But because you're stubborn and refuse to turn from your sin, you are storing up terrible punishment for yourself. For a day of anger is coming, when God's righteous judgment will be revealed. He will judge everyone according to what they have done. He will give eternal life to those who keep on doing good, seeking after the glory and honor and mortality that God offers. But he will pour out his anger and wrath on those who live for themselves, who refuse to obey the truth and instead live lives of wickedness. There will be trouble and calamity for everyone who keeps on doing what is evil, for the Jew first and also for the Gentile. But there will be glory and honor and peace from God for all who do good, for the Jew first and also for the Gentile. For God does not show favoritism. Who is Paul writing this morning to? To the church in Rome. This reproof, this warning is being written to Christ followers. And he's telling them that to know God is not enough, because even in our knowing, we still have the choice to obey or disobey, to pay attention or ignore. See, what ensures that we will experience God's glory and honor and peace in our lives? Obedience to him. Question, is it reassuring or alarming to you that God doesn't play favorites? Just because you believe and you know does not mean that you get extra favoritism. God plays no favorites. So our response depends on who is really in charge of our life, us or God. See, God looks at us as one human race, equally sinful, yet equally loved. There is no us versus them from God's perspective. So when we think in that way, us versus them, we are not living with the mind of Christ. If we live and talk as though we are different from them or those people, we're doing what comes naturally for our sinful humanity, pitting ourselves against one another and choosing sides. No matter how others are responding to situations we experience, we are to remain firmly on God's side. We are called to advocate for the powerless, absolutely, and we are called to stand up for justice. But in so doing, our words and actions should never bring shame to Jesus. Name calling, slander, shouting matches, angry diatribes, belittling others, or hitting someone over the head with the truth bring dishonor to the one we claim to follow. We're not to blend in or mirror the attitudes and behaviors of those who have never experienced God's grace and forgiveness firsthand. We are called to stand out, to live life counterculturally, just as Jesus did. And the question is, if we don't, are we really his? If people cannot see that we are different from the rest of the world, are we his? The proof that we are Jesus' disciples is demonstrated in our following his example. Do we, like Jesus, permit others to inconvenience us, or do we dismiss them, as the disciples tried to do with the children? Do we graciously listen to and engage others who might have different opinions, or do we denigrate them, applying one of many nasty labels, which could have been done to Mary? Do we allow the messiness of another's life to cause us to be compassionate, or do we push back in fear, which could have happened with the man with leprosy? And do we offer life-changing kindness as Jesus did, or further malign and add our voices to the vitriol being flung at someone for their poor choices? Too often, rather than obeying Jesus to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us, we fall into the traps of mischaracterizing those we disagree with and dehumanizing them in order that we can justifiably, quote unquote, disregard them altogether. We've got to stop taking our cues from the world. We may need to take a sabbatical from social media, such as Facebook or Twitter, or an extended hiatus from all news media. If what you're listening to is causing you increased anxiety, causing your blood to boil, or producing hatred in your heart, then it is time to recalibrate. Turn off the noise, get alone with God, and listen for him to speak anew. He's not going to shout over all the other noise, but he will certainly tell us what is right if we'll take the time to listen. Jesus has given us a new commandment. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I've given you, and be sure of this, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. But it doesn't stop there. We have a job, but we also have a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. From John 13. God loves us and them equally. He doesn't have a them. We are all us. Praise him for his incredible kindness, his tolerance, and his patience, despite our willful disobedience, belligerence, and the shame we often bring to his name. But don't be misled. A time is coming when Jesus will pronounce his judgments on all. Let's be diligent in doing life with Jesus. And that means living life on his terms.